Today, I'm excited to share with you my chat with Bethanie Finger, author of More Than Life, which is a first of a trilogy that I am so excited to talk about. I kind of went into it blind and it ends on an absolute cliffhanger. What an adventure she has set up. Bethanie is absolutely amazing, which is not surprising. That is kind of on par for most of the people that I've talked to. She is a librarian and had some great insights on rewarding moments in doing that, as well as she got over 500 rejections on her manuscript and kind of dealing with that. So I hope you enjoy our chat. Welcome to Busy Reading Romantasy, a video podcast that discusses books that merge elements of romance and fantasy while occasionally exploring other genres. We get to escape our world and dive deep into themes of good versus evil, power dynamics, and all of the delicious taboo topics. Curiosity and open-mindedness are a must. That being said, this is a podcast for mature audiences only and will contain spoilers. Your mental health matters, so be sure to check the trigger warnings of each book to decide if this is the right episode for you to listen to. Now, let's get into today's episode. Bethanie, how are you today on this lovely Monday?
Good, how are you?
I am doing great. Remind me again, where are you at? What's the weather like?
I am in Las Vegas, so the weather's warm.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm in Florida,
Yeah.
so I'm the same, but this is where like I've started my garden and I forget that other people are still experiencing winter sometimes around the world.
I grew up in the Midwest, so I actually really miss the winter.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping we don't have to stay here very long.
That's fair. That's fair. I'm actually from Seattle, so also moved down south, but I'm used to like it's funny. I think about that sometimes how much I've acclimated now because we had a brief stint where it was pretty consistently in the 40s for about a week here, which is very, very cold for Florida. And I had a memory. I was like, oh wait, when I was in middle school, I remember walking to school with my like uniform skirt when it was like snowing outside, but we grew up that way, so it was fine. Could not do that now.
In the Midwest, you start wearing shorts in like March, even though it's 35 degrees outside.
Yep. My dad lives in Alaska too, so he's like 60s for him is like terribly hot. But
I have an electric blanket that I'm obsessed with. So since moving here, anything below like 60 and I am just freezing.
Yeah.
So I have my electric blanket just on.
That's perfect.
Most of the time. Yeah. Even just like sitting on the couch. It's like, well, where's my electric blanket?
Yep.
Need to be warm.
I'm a big tea drinker. So throughout the day, that's my thing of like a nice warm beverage. Even in the summer, it just works. But yeah, so Bethanie is joining us today because we're going to be talking about her book, More Than Life. And so when we first started talking, I read the synopsis just to like I like to pre-screen and make sure that it falls in the genre of what I tend to talk about, which it absolutely did. And I have been so excited to talk about this book. So usually we start just a little bit to get some background about you as an author. So I was curious, we kind of just started talking about this a little bit before we started recording. What were some of your favorite books as maybe like a child, teenager that have just kind of stuck with you?
So I am a millennial, so duh, Harry Potter, I guess, right? Like I was raised by Harry Potter and Magic Treehouse.
I feel like we're very similar people already, just from the few things we now know about each other.
What else? I loved anything by Meg Cabot. Like Princess Diaries was my whole like preteen existence.
Yep.
Love Ella Enchanted was probably like the first fairy tale retelling I reread, and now that's one of my favorite subgenres. Love Marissa Meyer, not just because she's my friend. Like I am biased, but I'm not biased.
There you go.
Especially like when I was younger, I feel like we didn't have social media. Like because I'm old, I'm 35. And when I was a big reader, like in junior high and high school, we didn't have social media. Facebook wasn't even out until I was in college. MySpace was like, really, you just posted pictures there and tried to change the background so it looked like it was snowing. And outlets for literary conversations were limited to your circle of people. And I didn't have a lot of friends that read books. So I just kept grabbing books after book after book and reading them. And it wasn't until probably 10 years ago, 8 years ago, that I realized it was a culture I could be a part of. Like even just now looking at the shelf behind you, I'm like, I've read that one. I want to read that one. That's on my TBR. I think one of the biggest like series that has stuck with me is the Lunar Chronicles. Retellings are huge. They have been for years, but a sci-fi futuristic retelling of Cinderella with a cyborg, so unique, such a great, unique concept. And I loved Kiera Cass. I loved the selection, even though book 2 totally stressed me out and the spinoff was not great. What else? I'm like looking at my shelf. Like, what do I have? Because I have like 700 books in here. Anything I could get my hands on when I was younger, I would read it. And to the point where now I don't even remember most of them. I just remember like maybe the cover, the color, or an emotion that sparked within me. Ellen Conford she was a teen author in the 80s. And I was at a school with a very underfunded library. So I read everything she wrote. Holly Jacobs was another one. I read a lot of hers. Just anything. It's all over the place. Yeah, mostly young adult, mostly, clean romance, but I've known to enjoy a few thrillers here and there as well.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's such a good point. Because again, I was the exact same way. I was just consuming books, and I moved a lot as a kid, so I didn't have friends, or if I did, it's kind of that loose definition of friends. So I didn't have anybody to talk about these books with, which is kind of sad because looking back, I feel like I read so many really great books. And it's so funny, actually. Last night I just watched, I didn't realize Fallen had been made into a movie.
Did also not know that.
Yeah, in 2016, and it was just casually on Netflix, and I was like, how did I never
hear? Was it good?
No.
Well, then I won't bother.
I was like, I knew I read it. And it's funny because watching the movie, it took me a while to remember what the plot was because it wasn't how I imagined it. So it didn't match my version of the book, my movie, essentially. But it's funny how so many years had passed, but I can still, they're almost kind of like blurry memories of me like reading books, as like I can picture what these things look like. And I was like, oh wait, I didn't picture the school like that, but certain things I could remember. So that's so interesting. But I see exactly what you're saying. And it's amazing now to be part of such a big group and community where you can find people that we can talk about these things with, and it becomes so much more exciting.
Yeah, I think also I can pinpoint certain moments in my life based on what books I was reading. I remember reading the third Harry Potter book because I read them when they came out. And it was a school night, and my bedroom was under the street light. So I would crawl into the window and read by the street light.
That's amazing.
And I vividly remember that's when my dad started working the night shift, because he came home one night and was like, what are you doing? It's 1:00 in the morning. And I was like, can I finish this chapter?
Yeah, I'm almost done. I'm so sorry.
And the same with the Princess Diaries series. I have a vivid memory of reading that in the car on my break at work when I was working at Hardee's. So like, okay, I read that when I was about 16. So I have these strange moments in the timeline of my life that sync up with specific books that I've read. And I just wonder, sometimes I wonder, like, would my mindset be totally different now if I tried to reemerge myself in those books? Or would I like really lose that magic because now I have like more adulthood and life experience?
I feel that too. I've definitely there's I was talking with another friend of mine who also has a book podcast, and we were kind of going down the rabbit hole of one trying to find titles of things that we had read when we were younger.
Mm-hmm.
And because she was talking about the series, and I was like, oh, I've read that. I don't know what it's called, but I've read it, and I was able to find it online. And it
But
is
what is
kind
it?
of,
I have to know now.
oh, I think it was called like Switched or something.
Mm.
It was about this girl who was growing up. She knew she was adopted, or maybe she didn't know, but she was adopted. And she could only like eat fruit. She was just like different, didn't quite fit in. And it turns out she was like one of the changelings from Fae.
Oh,
I think it might have been called Switched or something like that.
I don't know that, but I am interested.
Uh, yeah, and so we had talked about that a little bit because I was like, oh, I've definitely read that. But you bring up a good point that a lot of those books that felt very magical, it'd be interesting revisiting some of those to just kind of take a temperature check to see like, oh, what do I think about them now that I
Mm-hmm.
am a completely different person than what I was,
Do
you
they
know?
hold up is the
Yeah,
concern, right?
yeah.
Like what if it doesn't? Am I ruining a childhood memory now?
Right.
I
Yeah. That's
although that being said, I reread Harry Potter every year and I don't
yeah.
that magic hasn't expired for me.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, but then again, like rereading Twilight, mm,
Yeah.
there's some problematic stuff we ignored in the early 2000s that we really shouldn't have.
Oh yeah, yeah,
But like as an
absolutely.
adult, I kind of step back a little and I'm like, would I really encourage a young girl to read this?
Oh
I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. I see that with a few that I read that immediately have that like bad boy image, and like when you're a
Hmm.
teenager, you're like, ooh, so mysterious. But as an adult, I'd be like, yeah, this cannot be great. It's not going to end
Yeah.
up well. But um, awesome. Well, switching over from talking about being such avid readers, I would love to know more about how you got started in writing.
So I've been writing ever since I can remember, especially when I was younger. I would write songs and poetry. And I wrote my first book when I was 13, which I recently learned. I do not remember a lot about writing it, but I recently learned that it was a Babysitter's Club fan fiction,
Oh,
because
yeah,
I don't remember it, but
yeah.
my mom does.
Uh-huh.
And she described it to me, and I was like, "Isn't that a baby? That kind of sounds." And I went and looked at it. Yeah, it was a fan fiction of Babysitter's Club. I just didn't realize it at the time because, again, that stuff wasn't really, I don't know, broadcasted openly as it is now.
Mhm.
And I started querying when I was 17. I don't know how many projects I've written. Just a
Yeah.
lot, you know. Uh, I like to think that I got better and better with every project. And
Mhm.
this particular project, the More Than Life trilogy, just so happened to be the one that people reacted to the most. And so it's
Mhm.
also the one that got published.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. What when it comes to it can be specifically more than life or just kind of in general, what does the writing process look like for you? Do you have certain like traditions to kind of get in the mindset, or you're just like ready to go?
I just write. I
Yeah.
like certain things depending on my mood. Sometimes I want to
Yeah.
be outside. Sometimes I want to be cozy. Sometimes I want to
Mhm.
be cold. I love sensory details. What's the temperature like? What's it smell like? What's it feel like? What's it look like? What's it sound like? So, like, for example, today I was writing this morning and I lit a candle that was a pine tree and evergreen because
Mhm.
I was writing a scene in a forest and I really wanted to immerse
Ah.
myself in what that might smell like or feel like. So it's more that I set the my environment based on what I might be writing, but I don't really have a specific ritual that I do because it's always different. And I don't always
Okay.
know when I'll get to write. Sometimes I'm writing on my lunch break on my phone because I got a really good idea. Sometimes I'm
Mhm.
at a cafe with my writer friends and we're writing. Sometimes I'm in the car on a road trip and I'm typing away. So I do sometimes focus a lot on my environment and what I want my own personal comfort level to be, but I don't necessarily have any rituals.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Focusing more on more than life, can we start by getting kind of a spoiler-free synopsis for anyone that might be interested in it?
See, this is where I forget everything I've ever written.
That's fair. That's fair.
So More Than Life is a grief project that was inspired after I unexpectedly lost my father. And I started writing about my personal experiences after that loss. And eventually, during my 2022 Nano project, which is National Writing Month, I was looking at some of my content and looking at some of my sort of notes that I had in my phone. And I decided to combine those experiences that I had with a note that was in my phone, which is it's a conversation between two people. And I know it sounds improbable, and the other person says it's not improbable, it's impossible, which is in the book. And it just got me thinking, who are these people? Who are these two people that have such different opinions on what's optimistic and what's pessimistic and what's real and what's legend? And why are they having a conversation? And what is that conversation really about? And so this story follows a young woman named Cordelia, who's 19. She lives in a seafaring kingdom in the 1700s. And when her father dies, she loses her title, she loses her home, and she doesn't have an inheritance because she's a female. But what she does gain is the family secret, which is the lost location of the mythical island of Quilaris, which is based on Atlantis. And while she tries to find herself in her new life as a bar maiden, because what else could she get for work without any training or inheritance, she meets a young fisherman and later discovers that he was actually her father's apprentice. And by the end of the book, the two of them are sort of responsible for not only finding this island, but rescuing it from an enchanter that no one even realized how powerful he was. Is that a good summary? Did I say enough?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. That,
like,
yeah,
did I spoil the whole thing?
Here's the whole story.
I know, like, I don't want to spoil anything, but
Yeah.
I think the blurb spoiled a lot too. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Because I didn't write
That's
the
fair.
blurb, so I don't for sure know what it had in it.
Gotcha. No,
Yeah.
that was great. That was great. Checks out. That is the book that I read.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. So now, just for anyone who is watching, we're going to go into a little bit more detail around this book. So it will, in fact, have spoilers. If you have not read it, this would be a great place to pause the episode, go read the book, and then you can come back and enjoy the rest of the episode. But yeah, so first of all, getting right into it, when Cordelia lost her title and kind of like everything and was trying to go find a job, I really felt for her, man. That was rough.
That's rough.
And as you mentioned, she didn't really have any skills besides being a lady, and so she got turned away from a seamstress and kind of a like childcare governess job, and ends up learning to work at the tavern. And I have to say, I really, there's no question behind this, just my thoughts, like admiring just her determination and willpower to just be like, going through such a hard time and to just be like, you know what, I'm going to figure this out, after just losing her dad so quickly. So one of the nice things about going into the book blind is like having no clue what's going to happen. So we kind of get this idea that we know Jasper kind of delivers this letter. We don't know a whole lot yet, and she gets moved out of the house so quick. The things that are maybe supposed to get set in motion don't get set into motion, and so in my head at that point, I'm like, man, she's gonna get this letter, and then she's gonna go on this adventure, and nope, that does not happen. The first half of the book is just her in this tavern, figuring out herself, her life, and kind of learning. And I don't, I wasn't, my favorite thing about books is those little moments that don't, I always say that they don't necessarily have anything to do with the plot. They kind of do because it reinforces like the character and everything. But the budding relationship between her and Jazz, um, and kind of all of those little moments, like I feel like I know them so well, and it's due to so much of the book being about that
Mhm.
and slowing down. So I just like want to commend you for that. Again, I guess there's no
Oh, thank
question
you.
there besides like kind of what were your thoughts around kind of making that such a lengthy part of the book before they get into the adventure essentially?
I mean, there are multiple facets that sort of require that. One, there's a plot twist in book 2 that I had not originally planned on writing, so I really
Mhm.
had to lay the groundwork in book 1 so that it would be plausible
Fair.
and enjoyable to read.
Yeah.
2, I started writing this with the typical YA formula where she goes straight to the adventure, and I realized she wasn't ready for that.
Mhm.
She was not ready to go on an adventure. She was not ready to save anything. She couldn't even put her own clothes on without assistance because she'd never had to in her 19
Yeah.
years of life. Like, this girl is barely capable of getting through a workday, let alone saving an entire mythical island. So a lot of it came down to she's not ready for this big responsibility, and I just wanted her to be more ready for it.
Mhm.
And then the other aspect of it, I am an adult. And I was like, why is she like running off with this strange man when he's like, oh, I totally knew your dad? Like, that's not a reason to run off with a strange man. We as girls are taught not to do that,
Right,
first of
right.
all. So I was like, okay, I really want them to like know each other a little bit. And so I
Mhm.
started adding like 1 or 2 scenes where they had met. And so it made more sense that she would be willing to go off on this adventure with him. And the story, it just kept spreading from there. And I fell in love with the two of them and their love story. And I'm
Mhm.
sure there probably are parts that didn't necessarily need to be in there, but I made them special in book 2 just so
Yeah.
I could say, no, 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 those are important. You can't cut
Yeah.
those. You can't cut
No, I love that. That's
those.
my favorite thing because even, like, at this point, I've read a few books since then, and
Mhm,
sometimes just, like, the pacing that I have to keep up with for this podcast
mhm,
in a sense, I'm reading books rather quickly, and it's those moments that, like, cement the book in my mind, so I can picture when, she was like shucking the oysters and cut up her hands and Jazz came and helped her, or the whole bread incident, and her trying to flip even a chair onto a table and she like couldn't
yeah,
do that at first, and then hits herself doing it. I those are like my favorite moments of books, and that's also a recent discussion that I had with another friend around when it comes to like adaptations, is that it's
mhm,
really hard to like fit all of those things in a movie, and that tends to be kind of the like fluff that gets cut out, but those are like the
mhm.
best part. Those are my favorite parts because then I feel like I know these people, and that's such a great point of like she just wasn't ready, which is also true. Um,
She
I
can't flip a chair.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a
no.
scene where she, like, apologizes to a door because she accidentally slams it, like, she chucked oysters with her bare hands because she was too embarrassed to ask for help, which I
Right.
think is a very relatable thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she genuinely was not ready for that, and even to a certain extent by the end of the book, sh there's part of her that I don't think is ready for that, but it's also like you're never going to fully be ready because Jaspar has been training for this his whole life and he's completely thrown off.
Yeah.
So, not only by his experiences with Delia and falling in love, which is something he never planned for. We're in spoilers now, right?
Yes,
But
absolutely.
also the reveal that the grandfather he had idolized his whole life, the origin of his
Mhm.
entire family, the reason that he had been hunting this island is actually the bad guy, not the
Mhm.
victim. like that just sets him on his own path that doesn't make sense anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So really the two of them, in order for them to go on this journey together, they really needed to get to know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I said, there's a plot twist in the beginning of book 2. So I really had to lay the groundwork because otherwise I wasn't going to be able to do it.
Fair.
Yeah.
Thinking ahead.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, so then like transferring over to the second half, woo, the
Mhm.
book just takes off. It's like
I know.
you finally the adventure picks up, and we get a little bit more of that kind of world building where we're just like learning
Mhm.
more of the history and the things that have transpired, and a lot of thing changes really quickly for both of them. What were some of your like favorite moments of that piece?
Just all the like romantic stuff. Um, I love the scene where she's in the forest and the
Mhm,
water dries up out of the creek.
mhm,
That originally was a scene where it's just like bandits trying to rob her.
mhm,
So it became a much bigger scene, and it even inspired a scene in book 2 that I'm really quite proud of. I love and hate the scene where Jaspar is like he's still Jazz and he realizes he has to leave, and he's like running around the hotel room trying to make sure like he hasn't left any trace of himself behind, and he like stops, he puts his hands on his knees, and he like looks around the room and is like, I just completely erased myself and now I have
mhm,
to walk out of here. And that moment when he takes the talisman off is just, it's gut wrenching.
mhm,
um It was really fun to write everyone's different reactions to the
mhm,
removal of the talisman. Like Diarmid
mhm,
just kind of paused and wasn't really sure what was happening. Nothing happened to Cordelia at all because it didn't work on her. Gladys walked right into a pile of snow, so that kind of shook her out. Mary barely had an experience at all, so it didn't matter.
mhm,
But the different reactions to that were really just quite charming to write. I loved everything in the K. I love the idea of like a blue, hazy house that's under the ocean. I think that's just so dreamy and
mhm,
magical. Everything with Hagonia is great because she's just this, I don't know, for lack of a better word, powerful being who's like just really
mhm,
calm, chill. Uh yeah, just everything. I don't know. It's
yeah.
such a great um emotional connection for me because I created this incredibly complicated but not really all that complicated world, and so all the
Mhm.
little tiny nuances of that world are just places that I like to revisit, which is why I'm working on the spinoff now, because I just was like, I'm not done being there yet.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I agree with all of that. Reading the scene, and again, I really felt for Cordelia as well when this person who's become such a big person in her life, especially after losing her father, he's
No.
just disappeared, and everyone's like, "What do you mean?" Um, and but that again, that was kind of the necessary for her to take her next
Mhm.
steps in her journey, and kind of watching them rebuild their trust and sweetness for each other as well. Like that was really sweet.
Did you
And
have any favorite scenes that you want to share? That as an author is like one of the best
yeah,
things, is
yeah.
hearing what people really liked.
Mostly it was the little moments in the tavern
Mhm.
of her, you know, learning about life, and kind of him being very sweet to her. I'm that type of person. I really fall for anything that when someone's really looking out for someone else, that just level of consideration and sweetness is always very much appreciated. I also really liked the Hagonia, that whole area, just the way she kind of like knew. I pictured her being so like tranquil and like, oh dear, because he's getting sick, and like she's just trying to get this information out, and again, just being
Mhm.
like this kind of magical, like being close to like as close to perfection as you can get. Like when I
Mhm.
first read, you call him Jaspar.
Uh-huh.
Okay. His reaction to Hagonia when it was something about her beauty, and at first I was like, "Wait, wait a minute, what?" And then I was like, "Oh, that makes sense."
It's not his fault.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was like, "Okay, I see what you mean." And I always love when the pieces start to fall into place, and you're like, "Okay."
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, just like that, them rebuilding their trust with each other. One of the things that I noted down, one of my favorite quotes, was when they were getting the information around like what had really happened, and
Mhm.
it's pointed out that history is told by the victors, and I wrote that one down because it was like that is one of my favorites, and it's a theme that I've been seeing in reading as well, and I think that's one
Mhm.
of the beautiful things about reading fantasy is when you can bring it into real world applications and you're like, oh yes, like that very much is the
Yeah.
case. So I really liked that bit as well.
I'm like so eager for you to read book 2 now.
I'm eager. um yeah, so uh was there any, I know you've mentioned a few of your a few bits that you liked. Did you have a favorite scene that you wrote or favorites?
Probably the oyster scene was really great.
Hmm.
I loved writing that scene. Anything where she called him liar was fun.
Hmm.
Um, Not necessarily a cheerful scene, but when he is on the ship and he is going back to the K and he like cuts his hair and puts on his regular clothes instead of his fisherman outfit, and he shaves his beard and he
Hmm.
gets rid of his accent and he goes back to being, quote, himself, and he
Hmm.
immediately misses his persona that he was when he was Jazz. That
Hmm.
was a really sweet acknowledgement of how easy it is to, I think, be the person that you are
Hmm.
and also be the person that you want to be, especially when you're
Hmm.
with different people or in different environments. For example, my day job is a fourth grade teacher. I
Hmm.
act very differently with my students than I
Yes, that's
do
fair.
than I do as an adult, but that doesn't mean
Yeah.
I don't enjoy my time in that persona.
Yeah.
Everything with Gladys and Taylor was great because I was not expecting to do that. That was a
Yeah.
totally random thing that I came up with at the last minute and had to go
Uh-huh.
back and add all those scenes. So I loved everything with Gladys and Taylor. Just
Oh, wow.
so
Yeah.
great, the two of
Yeah.
them.
That's awesome. Was there anything that was maybe more challenging or anything that had you kind of stuck?
Mm. I spent very little time editing the first 3 chapters,
Mhm.
just because they were very heavily inspired by my own experiences after I lost my dad. Chapter 1
Mhm.
is almost exactly the physical reaction that I had when I was, given that news. So it has very little editing. I think I wrote it once and my editor went over it once and I told her, do what you need to do. I can't read it.
Mhm.
The scene where she walks into the tavern for the first time and people are dancing and singing and playing card games and drinking and just happy and enjoying life. That scene where it feels like a personal attack for people to be happy when she's in mourning, that was just a really emotional moment because I think, at least for myself, I feel that sometimes when I have melancholy and other people are happy, it's like, how? Or
Mhm.
like when I don't feel good when I'm sick and other people can manage through something like that, how?
Mhm.
It just kind of feels like something that is so incredibly destructive in your world, in your experience, to notice that the entire world goes on anyways because it has no impact on them. I think that's a really grounding experience just for anyone to have.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely relate to that in moments of my
Mhm.
life, and that brought to mind another one of my favorites was when her and Jazz go to the market in town,
Mhm.
and you see more of kind of life bustling. And again, Cordelia doesn't really know how to navigate some of that, and he kind of comes in, and we also get the moment where she buys some dresses and she gets away from those mourning colors, and he his favorite color is blue.
It's blue.
Blue dress. And yeah, I think that was another very, very sweet moment. So in my notes, I literally have the second half ? Wild, all caps. The ending ? All caps, even more wild.
Yeah.
So it really just took off. And at the very end, we're left with basically her and Jazz are on a boat with the three brothers that we had met from earlier, even though they don't know who these two people are. And basically they're under attack from another ship, and it ends with her like essentially kind of locked in this crab trap cage as the ship is sinking.
Yeah.
And that's how the book ends.
Rough, right?
Girl, what? Yes.
So there's multiple facets of that. I came up with that last line, the ship was sinking and we were sinking with it.
Yeah.
And I immediately was like, that has to be the last line of this book.
Yeah.
One of the things that publishers and managers and agents and editors, one of the things that they emphasize a lot, especially for debut authors, is this is a trilogy. You have to make them read book 2. If you close out everything in book 1, they have no reason to be invested in book 2. And so I had kind of felt the pressure to end on a cliffhanger anyways. And I really like cliffhangers at the end of chapters because then you go to the next chapter.
Right.
But as a reader, I love cliffhangers because I feel like I get to the end of the story, but not to the end of the excitement. And so when I came up with that last line, I was like, okay, that's the end of my book. I have to find a way to get to that point, to that ending.
Gotcha.
And so a lot of it was, how do I come up with plots that would get me to that ending? And then there was a like guilty moment of like, is this too much? But since my books came out one right after the other, each book was published only a month after. So book 1 was published in February 2024, book 2, March 2024, book 3, April 2024. Since my books were coming out so quickly, I was like, it's okay. It's okay. And hopefully people get to that cliffhanger and they hate me, but they also go and they read book 2.
That was very kind and considerate of you. I did have that in my notes as well, that you had literally published like bam, bam, bam. So did you have all of those written and like ready to go? Okay. That makes sense.
There's several reasons behind that. One, and I don't want to like, this is nothing against other authors. Me personally, I will not publish anything unless the sequel is already written, because what if I have to go back and I can't change it? You know, like I said, the plot twist for book 2, I had to add almost 5,000 words to book 1. If I hadn't done that, the plot twist in book 2 would have been just garbage.
Yeah.
So I personally, I can't have it published until it's all done, because if I need to change something and it's already published, I just can't do it. And then 2, my publisher, Wise Wolf Books, they noticed during the pandemic that we as a society had become very attached to instant gratification because we were binge watching everything and binge reading everything and just experiencing things with no limitation because we were all at home with nothing to do. So they have been sort of changing their marketing strategy to capitalize on that by determining that, like, yes, there's benefits to having people wait for a year in between each book, but there's also a lot of benefits to making sure that those books come out really close together so that your attachment to those characters and that story doesn't expire before the next book comes out. So it's going to be the same with the duology I'm working on right now. It's coming out this summer. And the first book, More Than Dreams, is going to come out. And then within a month or two, I'm going to have More Than Destiny come out as well.
Okay. Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. I greatly appreciate you for that, because now I get to continue on my journey and see what else is going on. So going back to a spoiler free, if you could kind of prompt what we're looking at for More Than Legend.
More Than Legend focuses a lot more on the adventure and the clues and seeking out information and knowledge that will take them to Quallaris.
Gotcha.
And we get quite a few reveals, both about Jaspar's past and Cordelia's past, that maybe people are expecting, but maybe people aren't. I will say, not to like pat myself on the back, no one has guessed the plot twist in book 2. There's one at the very beginning. It's in like chapter 4 or chapter 5, and it's the exact opposite of what most people were predicting. So I'm really proud that I was able to do that. There's also a scene in book 2, which is probably the best thing I've ever written. And it's one of the saddest scenes, but it's one that I am exceptionally proud of. Like on days when I have imposter syndrome and I feel like a terrible writer, I go back and read that scene specifically to remind myself that I do have some talent and I can try to capitalize on that. And then More Than Legend, it kind of, okay, so it also ends on a cliffhanger.
I figured as much was coming.
So I have this thing where unintentionally I have become known for my cliffhangers. And I just keep making them bigger. So there's actually 2 plots at the end of book 2 that end on a cliffhanger.
Okay.
And More Than Love wraps everything up. It's a trilogy.
Yeah.
But More Than Dreams, which I'm working on right now, actually ends on 3 cliffhangers.
Of course.
So just because once you have more than one plot going on, inevitably you're going to have a couple of those stories that are still open. So you might as well make it a last chapter cliffhanger again. So hopefully people will read the next book.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And also I love what you said around not publishing until you kind of have a finished set, however many number that is, because that does make sense. I'm always amazed when authors manage to kind of like sneak things in that become a thing later as well. That is one thing as a non-author that I am absolutely amazed by the capacity to do anything like that.
Even this spinoff is, because Easter eggs, foreshadowing, one of my favorite things, which you'll notice a lot once you read book 2.
Gotcha.
But even the spinoff I'm working on now, I left clues for it all the way back in chapter 1 of More Than Life. Because I knew I was going to write it, and I knew I needed those moments where you as the reader could be like, oh, you need to be able to connect it to the original trilogy. When it's a spinoff, you need to be able to root it within the original trilogy, even if it's about different people, even if it's a different location, even if it's a different time period. And for that reason, I'm really glad I thought of the duology before the books were published, because I was able to toss in those clues here and there that hopefully people will enjoy. I've been quite impressed by readers, because I had a lot of like, who do you think the main characters are going to be? And a lot of people guessed correctly. And the same with the titles. So hopefully everybody enjoys that as much as they did the trilogy.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be exciting. How has your writing, if it has, which I'm going to assume it has, how's it changed or evolved as you've continued writing more and more books?
I think I've grown as a writer, like my creative process and my craft I've gotten more skilled in. But then I think there's also a certain level of doubt that comes with the success of a series, because then you worry like, oh man, what if the spinoff's not as good? What if I peak too soon? What if I'm a one-hit wonder? So there's a certain level of imposter syndrome that I think all creative people experience. And writing this duology, before I got More Than Dreams back from my beta readers, I was definitely feeling the heat of like, maybe I'm a one-hit wonder. This might not be very good. But luckily, I have some really great beta readers, and they enjoyed the story, so I didn't mess up. But
Good,
yeah,
good.
just trying really hard not to be recycled. You don't want to say the same
Yeah.
things. You don't want to do the same things. You don't want to. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding.
Yeah.
You know. uh, yeah, I think just as an author, we are always trying to reinvent ourselves while staying true to who we are as creative people.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I love that. And when I was doing some digging around, on your website, you mentioned that you got over 500 manuscript rejections as well.
Hmm.
Um, I would love to know how you went through that process and if you had any advice for anyone who like might be facing something similar.
First of all, thank you for looking at my website,
Yeah, of
because I
course.
put a lot of work into that, and I feel like people don't use it,
Yeah.
like especially the maps and stuff.
Yes.
Um, so my advice would be, don't let the mountain of rejections prevent you from reaching your goals as a writer and loving your
Mhm.
experience as a writer, because when you have that many rejections, it can really take away your love of writing, because you start to doubt yourself and you forget why you write in the first place. And then in terms of all those projects that didn't find their way into the world, one, that doesn't mean they never will. There's one that I'm pretty heavily, there's a lot of people that did read it, in terms of like friends and critique partners that are really pushing to have it published anyways. So that might
Mhm.
be coming next. I don't know. And then there's also the idea is, we all want to get published, right? Like that's our goal as writers, and I get that. But what I had to remind myself of was that they were rejecting my work, not me. And it wasn't necessarily a reflection of me. And I
Mhm.
forget who said this, but I met a literary agent once, and she said, think about the last book you read that changed your life. You finished it and you wanted to read it again. You wanted to tell everyone you know about it. You wanted fan fiction. You wanted fan art. You wanted an adaptation. You wanted to bury yourself inside that world and never leave.
Mhm.
That's what agents are looking for.
Mhm.
And when they don't feel that in a book, they move on to the next one, because they get literally hundreds of thousands of these books.
Yeah.
And so you really are presenting a piece of your soul that someone else might not resonate or connect with. One of the
Mhm.
things that I experienced for this project, which got 89 rejections, was it goes against the typical YA formula. Now, my representation, Rachel DeGrassi, and my publisher, Wise Wolf Books, they loved that. They thought it was a breath of fresh air. They were so excited to have something different. But most publishers, most agents, they don't want to go too far off the norm, because it might
Mhm.
not sell. And at the end of the
Mhm.
day, they are trying to sell books.
Mhm.
So I guess, like, as a writer, just remember that you are trying to present someone with something that is so incredibly perfect, they have to share it with the entire world. And that's going to be really difficult, even if
Mhm.
it's the best book in the world, because you don't know where that person is, or what mindset they're in, or what they're really truly looking for. I was at a conference probably 3 years ago now, and I'm not going to say her name, but I did not agree with her as an agent. But she said that she once rejected a manuscript without reading it because it had 110,000 words. And she thought that that was lazy writing, because she said it could have been easy to just drop it to 100,000. So I'm not going
Mhm.
to invest my time in a lazy writer. And she
Yeah.
also said, like, I once rejected an entire manuscript because it started with the word the. And I don't know if every literary agent is that picky. I
Yeah.
hope they're not.
Yeah.
But if you take into consideration how picky they are, and
Mhm.
perhaps why they are so incredibly prolific with having to make these choices of who is getting a manuscript and who's not, then I think it's a little bit easier to absorb the impact of all those rejections, because it's not
Mhm.
you that they're rejecting, and it's not even necessarily your work that they're rejecting. It's just
Mhm.
at that moment they're not the right person for it.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you point that out. And that does make sense to kind of keep that reminder is that they're probably facing their own pressures in terms of,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, it does come down to, maybe sales or numbers or whatnot. And yeah, that I imagine that to be very hard of something you've put a lot of your heart and soul and time and effort into. And I'm glad you kept going and you got there. And I think that most people who probably do something similar, I hope they feel the same way, that there are going to be people out there that are so happy that it did get published and that,
Mm-hmm.
it made its way out into the world. Because I am also kind of getting to that point too where I know what genre I like and I tend to stick with that. And the more I read, the more I am also looking for things that are fresh and a little different because
Mm-hmm.
some of it starts to get the same. There's some stuff that works. It's a great formula. And I love when I read something completely new and I'm like, oh my gosh, what world am I in right now? So yeah, well, I'm proud of you. I'm glad you
No,
kept
thank you.
going. And yeah, so I know you mentioned the duology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, any hints as to what you are working on with that, or potentially is there anything like on the periphery that you might get to eventually?
So, because it's already been publicly announced, I don't think it's a reason for me to not say. But the first book in the duology centers around Russell and Marie, which are two throwaway characters in book two that for some reason I got really attached to them. So I gave them their own scene in book three, and then that wasn't enough. So
Uh-huh.
they get their own book now. I have not revealed the star of More Than the duology sequel, More Than Destiny, because it
Mhm.
gives away a pretty big spoiler for
Okay,
book
fair.
one.
Yeah.
And I'm scared. Like that's what like my publisher and I are gonna have to work really hard to make sure that people are excited to read More Than Destiny without knowing the plot twist at the end of More Than Dreams. It might be impossible. I don't know for sure. But it's set place in My Curia. It's just instead of being in a small community in My Curia, we're at the capital with the queen and the
Oh,
princess.
okay. Yeah.
And we're seeing the other half of that story. We saw the world where Cordelia was taken from her home and had nothing to inherit.
Mhm.
And in the duology, you're about to find out why the society is the way it is
Mm.
and whether or not the current queen or princess have any plans to change that, which of course they do. Of course they do. But it also explores like why it's so incredibly hard to change that in a society as well. So
Yeah.
hopefully people enjoy it. Of course there's more mystery, there's more
Yeah.
romance. There's romance is my thing. I just love slow burns.
Yeah.
There's magic because it always makes it fun to toss in a little bit of magic.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I love that too. I see a lot of maybe some heated debates around the whole like spice, no spice realms.
Mhm.
I happily partake of any of that. I think it's nice to go back and forth, and I definitely appreciate a really good slow burn and kind of sometimes when you can remove some of the more physical aspects of romance,
Mhm.
bringing that having to like really lean on the emotional stuff becomes
Mhm.
very very sweet. And like I said, I've become so attached to the characters, and that's what I really appreciated about this book is having that really slow in-depth start and getting to know them before we all embark on this journey together, basically.
Yeah, and it's
um,
fun to do that where it's like a little
yeah,
touch here and a little touch there, and
yeah,
the more you're
absolutely.
with them, the more those touches that are somewhat accidental start to mean something much bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, awesome. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would love to mention around More Than Life or anything in
Just please
general? Or-
read it, and I hope
Yeah,
you like it.
absolutely.
uh, it's on Kindle Unlimited if you want to read it for free. You can always request it at your local library for free.
Mhm.
Um, I'm hoping it'll be turned into an audiobook soon.
Ooh.
I don't want to make any promises because I'm tilting my boat on whether I want it to be an audio book or an audio drama, or
Yeah.
both if I want to be selfish. I don't know if that makes me greedy. But yeah, if you guys follow me on Instagram, Bethanie Finger author, I share a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And recently I've been trying to share some hints at what's to come in the duology.
Exciting. Yeah, absolutely. Go check her out. Read More Than Life. Let me know how you're dealing emotionally with the cliffhanger. We'll all get through this together. And
Yeah. And please read book 2. I have not gotten to talk to anyone about book 2. So
I know
please,
I will. I
please
absolutely
read book
will.
2 and message me or have me come back on or something, because I
100%.
never get to talk to people about book 2, and book
Yeah.
2 has my whole heart. I just love it so
I'm
much.
so excited. I'm so excited, and I will definitely round out the trilogy. I'm invested now. I have to figure it out. Yeah. But one last little question before we finish out here. I also saw you've mentioned too that you're a teacher,
Mhm.
and you're a librarian. I would love to know if you have any like favorite or like really rewarding moments when it comes to doing that.
Just anytime a student trusts an adult, a teacher, with anything, I think is really emotional, because I think as adults, we live in a completely separate world where we have to worry about bills and errands and dishes and laundry and did I get my oil changed and my dog has to go to the vet and just being an adult. And
Mhm.
we forget sometimes the joy there is in being a kid. One of my students, I try to work with my kids on goals and rewards. Like if you
Mhm.
raise your grade here, I can do this for you or whatever. And most of my kids, it was I want a Hot Wheels car, I want this book, I want to sit by my best friend every day instead of in this group. But
Mhm.
one of my kids, and I wonder if this will stick with me my whole life. One of my kids, he wanted a pizza Lunchable. But he was very specific. He didn't want the cheap Lunchable. He wanted the big one that came with like an Oreo cookie and a Capri Sun. And
Mhm.
it still resonates with me because it just reminds me of how, the simplest joy in life that I think we as adults take for granted.
Yeah,
This
absolutely.
kid, I told him as long as it was under $10, I would buy it for him. He could
Mhm.
have had a book, a Hot Wheels car. One of my kids got like a Lego basket.
Mhm.
One of my kids got a like a, oh, what are they called? The plushy things.
Mhm.
He just wanted a fancy Lunchable. That's all
Yeah.
he wanted was a Capri Sun and a mini pizza. And it
Mhm.
made him so incredibly happy when he got it. Like when he came in and it was on his desk, he was
Mhm.
freaking out. And every person he saw that day, hey, did you know I got a pizza Lunchable? Yep. For lunch today, I had a pizza Lunchable. Yeah. Yeah. Just so happy
Yeah.
because he got a pizza Lunchable. And it just, as a person, like as an adult, it kind of makes me reflect sometimes when I am overwhelmed by like just being an adult. I'm like, what do I have that's like great though? And I try
Yeah.
to make a list every day of 5 things that I'm really grateful for, no
Yeah.
matter how small. Yesterday, I was running late and I hit 3 green lights in a row.
Yeah.
I felt like karma was
Yeah.
on my side. And I think that's something I would have taken for granted a few years ago. I
Yeah.
wouldn't have thought about the 3 green lights I got in a row. I would have thought about the 2 red ones that slowed me down, you know?
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
just a matter of perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That is something that has been near and dear. It's a good skill that I've actually learned in the past year or two is like shifting that perspective. Because you're right, as adults, we have so much, um, and we have so much going on. And I like to like thank myself of my brain being like, I see where you think that this like, you're protecting me. I get that. And I'm gonna switch over to this perspective around, I like to change sometimes working from home and having to be my own
Mhm.
boss. is great, and there's not great days, and I like to switch it to like, no, I get to do this, right? Or
Yeah.
I've been finding that joy too of like reminding myself I have adult money, so I can go like,
Yeah.
I take like,
So I can do
I
things.
started, yeah. If I want to go take a little dance class or something, like I can go do that. And like, yeah, little kid me would have like been pumped that I got to go do this thing. So, I love that. I
Even
love that
your
perspective.
even just your everyday vocabulary when you're talking to yourself, when you're talking to other people,
Yeah.
if you change the way that you talk, you change the way that you think. So
Mhm.
let's say your friend gets to go to a concert that you didn't get to go to. Instead of saying like, "Oh, I'm so jealous," you could say, "I'm so happy for you that you got to
Mhm.
go and that you got to do that." Or instead of saying like, "Oh, must be nice," you can say like, "That is so great that you got to do that."
Mhm.
Because you're focusing all that negative energy on what you didn't get to do instead of allowing yourself to be positive about what the other person is gaining. Because also
Mhm.
now when you get to do those things, they're going to be happy for you and you're just
Mhm.
putting more joy into the world that eventually will come back to you. So it's just really retraining our brains, which have been manipulated, especially by social media, into thinking a certain way. It's retraining our brains to only focus on the positive, to only think about the positive. And it's very difficult, especially on like high melancholy days, but
Mhm.
it does have a shift in how you start to feel about yourself and how you start to interpret the world, especially if you experience things like melancholy or burnout or just high levels
Mhm.
of drastic changes in your life. So I think personally, it's really shifted my perspective in the world.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. This is the one thing that I absolutely love about this podcast, and I had a great conversation with my friend the other day, who also has a podcast, and she had mentioned like, oh, because it's a bit of work. There's some time investment, obviously,
Mhm.
and she's like, and I just really feel like nobody's listening. And I said, oh yeah, oh I absolutely feel that way,
100%.
100%. And I remind myself that like even if no one was listening or even if a few people were listening, would I still do this? And I was like, absolutely, because I talked to
Yeah.
so many really cool people and I was so excited for this conversation. And it's always a sign to me of how great these conversations go. And a lot of the
Mhm.
times, this is my first time like actually talking. We've sent, maybe a few emails, a few DMs,
Right.
but this is our first time actually getting to connect and just like consistently. There's such cool people that I'm getting to meet. So I was like, yes, keep going, and I love
Yeah.
that perspective shift, and finding those small moments of joy, and it really is like dominoes, and it continues to make an impact. So um, thank you so much again for joining me and taking the time to chat with me. And I am so excited to continue on this adventure. We absolutely will have to do another episode
Yay.
updating my progress of this. I am even more excited now for book 2 and 3 now that we've talked. So I will message you and keep you updated for that. But yeah, thank you again so much.
Thank you. I look forward to speaking with you again after More Than Legend.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you've made it to this point in the episode, thank you so much for watching. I'd be incredibly grateful if you showed some support either by following or subscribing, depending on what platform you're watching on, and leaving a comment. You can always follow me on Instagram at Busy Reading Romantasy or on TikTok at busy period reading period romantasy to see what I'm up to. You can also email me at busyreadingromantasy@gmail.com to tell me your thoughts, dreams, secrets, or if you just have any book and author suggestions you'd love me to cover. Grab yourself a good book, get cozy. I'll see you next Wednesday for a new episode.